Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Extra Serving, a Nation's Restaurant News podcast. I'm your host, Holly Petre, here with the latest episode, and I'm joined by my two lovely co-hosts, one in person.
That is me, Sam Oches, Editor-in-Chief of Nation's Restaurant News.
And I'm Leigh Zinsmeister, Managing Editor of Nation's Restaurant News. I'm just across the river. I'm not that far away from you guys, but I am
not to be with us, actively not to be.
I actively chose not to be with you today after spending 14 hours with both of you yesterday and several hours with Holly the day before that. So
not enough, in my opinion.
We've had our fill. I've had my fill in that case then, Sam.
That hurts my feelings, but whatever.
Hurts my feelings more.
Yeah. You live here. I'm like never here. Well, I'm here once in a while. She's still choosing not to be here.
We're about to see each other in 3 weeks for the NRA show.
You told me not to come in today.
That's fair. That is fair.
Lest our listeners think I'm like, being insubordinate or some such by staying home today. He told me not to come in.
If they hadn't already grasped that you are insubordinate from all the other episodes.
But we will see each other and most of our listeners in 3 weeks at the NRA show.
That's right. Yes, good plug for our presence at the NRA show.
Yes,
indeed.
We will have a booth at the show at McCormick Place 3831, which I drilled into my head yesterday. And
I did not know that. Okay.
Yep, we're going to be talking to lots of folks. You're going to be there for a full week in Chicago.
Full week.
I will be there for 5 days. So we're going to get our fill. I have not been to Chicago in 3 years. I briefly lived there. You lived there once upon a time, Holly. One of my favorite cities, actually, if not my favorite city in America. Sorry, New York. But yeah.
We take offense to that.
I don't think I knew that Sam lived in Chicago.
For 4 months. It was over the course of a summer for an internship in college. And to be fair, I lived in the suburbs. But
it doesn't count.
Other than that, I called it Chicago. I went into the city every weekend, so that counts.
Okay.
Yes, I lived in Chicago for 6 years. So I
knew that.
Was a Chicagoan. So I officially count. I lived in the city because I would never live in a suburb. Apologies.
Yeah, think about how many suburban Chicagoans listen to this podcast. There's nothing wrong with
apologies. It's just not for me.
I've only been to Chicago once. I was 10 years old and we were there for a day and a half after my baby cousin was born. No longer a baby, of course, but stopped by, visited family, and kept driving.
This is going to be your first.
This will be a whole new world for me. First NRA show, wow. First real trip to Chicago.
A first grown-up experience of Chicago, which is great because Chicago has some lovely restaurants and bars and lots of fun food and beverage experiences that we are going to be partaking in.
I'm excited to experience all of it. Yes.
Besides the fun food and beverage experiences, mostly let's emphasize we would like to see your faces. Those of you listening, please do come say hello, 3831. That's our booth. We'll say it again, 3831. And we'll be all around the city for those 5 days. So come say hello, shoot us an email if you want to set up something, or just find us while we're there.
Yes, just find us. We'll be walking around. I'll probably be in bright colors. So please find me. I should be easy to find.
Kind of her thing.
It's kind of my thing to be easily found. So just look for the girl who's standing out in a crowd, probably in some brightly colored pants and a brightly colored shirt. It's my blonde hair. So find me. I'll film you.
What a heck of a description.
Feels accurate though.
It's not wrong.
No.
I'm wearing bright green pants right now. I mean, you can't see them, but they are very green.
I believe you. I know they're there.
They are Kelly green. So I may be wearing black on top, but I am wearing color. So
should we talk about food and not fashion now?
I mean, we can keep talking about fashion.
She just slipped in here and turned it into a totally different podcast and hoped we wouldn't notice.
Let's talk about Chipotle because they were pretty much the news this week. It was pretty much all about Chipotle for an entire week, I'd say. Pretty much from the time that we hung up the phone last week on this podcast to this morning. So I'd say Chipotle's been the news for the past week. Covered a lot of ground. They've talked about their new sustainability initiatives. They've talked about turnover. They've talked about helping healthcare workers. They released their earnings report. There is a lot to cover with Chipotle. So someone jump in.
Yeah, well, it was a lot. It was a bit of a roller coaster, right? Because their sales are up, what, 9%? Which good. That's great. I think we all know that Chipotle is sort of back in crushing it mode. However, their turnover was like 200%. And that's really bad. I mean, that's much worse than industry averages. I think industry averages, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more like 125 to 150, I think, percent. But, right now in this labor crisis we have, on one hand, you could excuse that to say, well, it's just sort of a historically bad labor market. But we've been doing a lot of talking lately with folks about the importance of retention, that the labor squeeze going on right now has made hiring hard, but turnover is about retention. And so if your turnover is bad, that's not a great reflection of company culture and things like that, because that means that you're hiring, but people are not sticking around. So that's an interesting thing to watch going forward, because, your sales can be incredible, but turnover is expensive. And so it's going to really hurt their bottom line if they're still wrestling with that, even if sales are up a lot. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, because Chipotle, great sustainability efforts, and their shareholders are pressuring them from a diversity standpoint, and that hopefully will have positive outcomes, and sales are up, but it seems like there's still some things they need to sort out on the company culture piece of this.
Yeah, I think the name of the game for Chipotle this quarter will be trying to just keep their costs as low as they can. They raised menu prices again last quarter, 4%. They say their food prices their food costs are up 12 to 13%. And they say they don't see that slowing down. They've said that they haven't seen a negative reaction from consumers, which a lot of restaurants are still saying, but some are starting to see, pushback from consumers on inflation. And of course, their labor costs are up. They did raise their minimum wage last year to $15 an hour. Doesn't look like it's helping with retention yet, but maybe that remains to be seen. But it just seems like their costs are spiraling a bit. And so it's going to be, how do we balance? How do we, keep sales moving in the right direction, but also keep our costs down?
It's interesting. I was just writing about Cheesecake Factory earnings, and their staffing is up to pre-pandemic levels. So they're actually up above where they were at the pandemic in terms of staffing. But their labor costs are up like 5 to 6% or something. So they're still dealing with it. I mean, they're up like 21%. So they're doing the same casual dining upswing that everyone else is doing, that we've seen across the board. But their labor costs are up that they're struggling with, but they're still seeing staffing really increase. I mean, I don't think I've seen anybody else say that they've had staffing increase like that. But everybody's saying that labor costs are up across the board. Even if they haven't done a $15 an hour minimum wage, staffing is still going to be an issue. These labor costs are going to be an issue for brands across the board. And I think even for brands that are saying that they're seeing these upswings in revenue and same store sales, that we're going to start seeing some sort of a downturn like we saw with Domino's.
Sure. If I can say one more thing about Chipotle before I take the bait on that segue you just tried to do.
Oh, you're shooting down the segue.
I'll circle back. Chipotle did say that their stores are 85 to 90% staffed, which they say they called it business as usual, which I take to imply that it's what they were dealing with before the pandemic. But turnover is expensive. So that's, I think, where a lot of Chipotle's costs are coming from. They said their labor costs were up more than 26% last quarter.
Wow.
So just to say, I think that's probably similar across the board. You can staff your stores, but retention is going to be the next trick with labor. So anyway, Domino's.
Not as good of a segue, but yeah.
So Domino's is down. They were just crushing it during the pandemic. We knew they were going to be down. This is not a surprise to anyone. They could not maintain that momentum. It just was impossible. So they're down 3.5%.
That's same store sales.
Same store sales.
In the U.S. Yeah.
In the U.S. Yes. Not internationally. we judge them by the US is typically how we evaluate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Domestic. I just wanted to clarify what that number was.
Yes, that is typically how we on NRN evaluate numbers is same store sales in the US. So they're down 3.5% in the US. And so, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why. I was talking with Joanna Fantozzi, who was our Domino's editor earlier, and asking her what she kind of thinks. And she was saying that Ritch Allison, the outgoing CEO, was saying that it's a lot of things due to Omicron variant, to the labor issues, he was kind of saying everything across the board that everybody else is saying, just kind of throwing it out there and saying all of the reasons why the labor crisis, Omicron, the rising costs of inflation, just, everything you could name, he was naming. So she was also saying that one of the reasons why it may be harder for them in terms of dealing with a labor crisis is that they don't use third-party delivery. So they have an in-house delivery system. So that may be a reason why they are dealing with a labor crunch more than others. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
You couldn't tell if that was a period or a comma. So credit to Joanna Fantozzi, who I said should be here on this call because she was coming in hot with some Domino's tips this morning as she was listening to their earnings, but she has a busy day. So go read Joanna's coverage of it, but we'll do our best to deduce what she was sharing with us. Because yes, to me, my reaction to what Joanna was filling us in on real time was it sounded like a lot of excuses for what could be some longer term, bigger issues that Domino's may have. To your point, Holly, this labor situation we're in could be very much, could be dangerous for Domino's, or much more of an issue than it is for other pizza chains because of their reluctance to go over to third-party delivery. And so they have to do the hiring, they have to do the retention. And if they're doing that, then it's going to be harder for them to staff up. But yeah, I mean, my reaction, because Omicron, I think when you talk about from an Omicron standpoint, I mean, that has to be a labor issue because Omicron didn't hurt sales so much, and they shouldn't have hurt a delivery business, especially. I mean, if anything, that might have helped Domino's. But if it takes out a lot of your workforce, that's what we saw a lot of from a lot of other restaurant companies, that all these employees were calling out sick with Omicron. And so that was more of an issue. So that's a problem, but they're also having supply chain issues. And anyway, across the board, and Joanna pointed out, Papa John's is actually still doing quite well. So it would be easy to say, well, Domino's coming back to earth. They were, flying so high in 2020 and into 2021. And part of that is true. But it just seems that, like, if you compare to other pizza companies, which did come back down, but then stabilize, Domino's might have some other issues they've got to deal with to get back to a point where they are stable.
Yeah, I'll say Domino's has been doing well for a long time. They were always flying high in the years before the pandemic. They used to be, 5 years ago, the brand that we would talk about when it came to technology innovation across the board. And I think they were set up really well for a pandemic, as well as any restaurant company could be. And they were able to kind of ride that wave. But we've seen a lot less of the sort of innovation and cutting edge stuff from Domino's the last few years. And I think it might be starting to catch up with them. They've been able to just sit back and not coast, but keep doing what they've always done and be successful during the pandemic. And now other brands, Papa John's is doing work with AI. Other brands are coming out and doing more innovative things, and it's paying off. So I'm curious to see, this is Ritch Allison's last week on the job. So I'm curious to see what comes out of Domino's in the quarters ahead, if there's going to be a shift in strategy of what's going to happen under new leadership there. Because I think there's a lot of potential to turn this around. One quarter of a 3.5% same-store sales dip is not a reason for a company like Domino's to panic. But I'm curious to see what the reaction is internally and what's ahead for the brand.
And it's interesting. Russell Weiner, who's taking over for as CEO, has been around for a decade plus. This is the guy that was the architect of their whole new pizza recipe and marketing that came with it. And so with an internal hire typically means more of the same, or advancing sort of the same strategy. So that will be interesting, because this, if they were in enough of a dire situation, it could be worth bringing in a fresh perspective to come in and say, we're going to completely change things up. But they're not. They're going with a company person. So we'll just have to find out if but he is a marketing person. So, but he's an operations person. I think he's COO previous to now being CEO, but he was originally in marketing. So interesting guy, and he might have an interesting perspective on what Domino's can do. They might need something akin to what they did a decade ago with Our Pizza Sucks, only something maybe a little bit not different. They can't redo their pizza again.
I mean, Kelly Valade's looking for a job.
Maybe.
We don't know that.
We don't know
that. We left our last one.
There's a lot of CEO transitions going on.
Lots of CEO transitions. And so I know you would think that they would almost be looking for a turnaround specialist. A lot of those people, I think that's what Starbucks is looking for. Some sort of a image consulting, somebody who's going to be good for their image. Because I think they're seeing quickly that Howard Schultz is not the right direction for them.
We'll see. The other thing is, I think the transition at Domino's has probably been long planned. It was announced a couple of months ago already. And of course, I'm sure by March, they knew what they were looking at in terms of Q1. But when it's a transition like this, when someone is being promoted from within, it's often something that's been in the works for months, if not years. And so it could have been, everything was already in motion. So like I said, it'll just be interesting to see what happens, what changes, if anything, if this was a blip, if it wasn't, and it remains to be seen.
Well, another company that reported this morning, we're recording on Thursday, is McDonald's. So McDonald's reported this morning, they are up in sales. Hard to believe that they could keep going, but they're churning up.
The largest restaurant company in America. It's hard to believe that they can keep
I have no trouble believing it. And it's exactly on par with what analysts predicted, like down to the number. So
yeah, they're up 3.5%.
But their global numbers are the ones that are hard.
Their global numbers are up like 12%, like 11.8, I think 11.7. They're up almost 12%. And that's after losing $127 million because they closed the restaurants over the Ukraine crisis.
Okay. Yep.
So they lost $100 million from the supply chain and $27 million because of labor. Ron Ruggles had a really great tweet about this. If you need more information, highly recommend it.
And he's working on a story if you want like a longer form analysis.
Go check out that.
But also Twitter.
That's where I got my information from, is the tweet.
Oh no, that worries me.
Well, so despite losing $127 million, McDonald's is still up 12% globally, which is wild. So, I mean, please discuss.
Yeah, I mean, we do lack some context, I think, I'll be interested to read more into the situation with the Russian restaurants, because yes, that number jumps out, 12% globally, sales up globally when taking into account everything that's going on with their Russian restaurants. But TBD on that a little bit, because maybe there are some asterisks involved. But I think one of the things I told you, Holly, when we heard about this morning about Domino's going down and McDonald's going up, it strikes me as being some sort of a continuation of the right sizing, which is that McDonald's is in more of a place now where this is the number one restaurant company in the world, in America by far in terms of sales. They have had long stretches of regular 4, 5, 6% sales comps. This is a little bit back to business as usual. They didn't suffer, of course, nearly as much as most brands in the pandemic, but I think we're getting back to McDonald's business as usual, whereas other companies are still kind of riding the roller coaster of not only surges, but casual dining. We briefly discussed Cheesecake Factory, and there was 20% plus sales.
Almost 21%.
21% sales up. I mean, that is when you really look at, an ongoing an ongoing roller coaster that these brands are riding because of COVID, because casual dining is roaring back. But, you know, when you compare the numbers of 2020 to 2021 to 2022, it's all apples to oranges. Anyway, all to say that McDonald's is right where it usually is, which I think is back to normal. But still, I think impressive numbers nonetheless, considering just everything going on.
Yeah, well, and I'm not up to speed on the global numbers or Ron's Twitter feed, but domestically, at least, you know, when we're talking about Domino's, McDonald's feels like the opposite in that they've continued to innovate and try new things throughout the pandemic. Their digital sales were way up. It's been almost a year since they launched their loyalty program, and they're seeing big payoff from that, which other brands are catching on to. We've got a feature coming on loyalty and reward programs across the industry. And McDonald's has seen a lot of benefit from marketing promotions. In Q1, they had a big one with TikTok stars, which is a phrase that I still don't understand, but it worked for them. They had a big promotion in conjunction with March Madness. And so these, you know, new marketing strategies are really paying off for McDonald's. So that's where a lot of, at least the domestic growth is stemming from.
You never thought you'd say TikTok stars?
Not in conjunction with McDonald's marketing strategy. And I just things colliding that I shouldn't be surprised by, but continue to be blown away by how much we talk about TikTok at this job.
I will throw in one quick plug here, which is to say that yesterday, reason I'm here in New York, I had a great conversation with our keynoter for Create, the Future of Food Service, live in person in Denver this September. I sat down with our keynoter, Bon and Bao. We will have more information on him soon in the coming weeks. But he was talking about, we did talk about this very thing, which is how to get the attention of customers in this world of, you know, of digital innovation. Everybody's spending time on their phones, you know, media is completely upended. And one of the things he pointed out was partnering with creators. And that's exactly what McDonald's is doing, is finding those creators out there on social media, those influencers. We kind of laugh about it because influencers roll your eyes. I mean, it's like it seems ridiculous to call anybody an influencer who's like, oh, you know, I do Instagram and TikTok for a living. Like, that just seems so ridiculous. And yet it is successful.
It's like my dream.
Yeah. I don't know what to think about that, because I'm pretty sure you hate doing our social media.
I do.
And also, what?
This is something you should definitely be saying right now on the air, but sure.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, I think it's time to wrap up, guys. I think we've jumped the shark.
Good application of a term you just learned a few months ago.
Thank you. I'm so proud of myself for learning it. And I'm so proud of myself for being able to use it.
Yes, well done.
Thank you. Well, Sam, we're so glad to have you in New York City.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be here. I'll be here again soon, like, I don't know, a month and a half or something.
And Leanne, we're so glad that we got to see you yesterday.
I'm so glad I got to see you both too and spend some time with you both. Sam is laughing because he thinks I'm not being sincere.
No, I'm laughing because all of our voices are, oh, so thanks. I don't know.
Because we're so happy. Listeners, we're so happy. We're genuinely each other, listeners. So
it's always great to see each other and hang out. And we're excited to do it again in Chicago in a few weeks, and in New York again a few weeks after that, apparently. And
yes, and we'll be happy to see all of your shining, beautiful faces in Chicago. We'll be just as happy and smiley and cheerful. So get ready.
I think we'll be tired.
That sounded like a threat. Get ready.
Or else. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I very much appreciate it. And now on to the interview.